So here we sit, roughly 2 months since the uprising that began after the death of George Floyd while he was in the custody of the Minneapolis Police Department. And we are also basically just over 5 months, or just into 5 months of COVID-19 responses by different government entities and agencies around the United States. And what's the correlation with these two? Well, one of the correlating factors that we have to take into consideration right now, as you're starting to see facial covering mandates being instituted, especially in blue states that are run by, in some cases, marginally Marxist governors and mayors, or in other cases, very blatantly Marxist governors and mayors. And I would say for the most part, they kind of all are. There's no way they can avoid it. If they're in a blue state and they're a blue or Democrat, if you will, elected official, they have a very, very social Marxist, Gramscian Marxism philosophy in how they approach politics and government. It's just unavoidable at this point in time. So how does this all relate? How does COVID-19 response and the cultural Marxist revolution, how do they relate? So George Floyd dies. Protests kick off, turn to riots, turn to mass chaos in the streets of many cities. Minneapolis burns. Protests and riots continue to happen in Minneapolis to varying degrees. We're even starting to see protests spread to more rural communities in Minnesota. Very small towns, very, very small towns, are seeing small gatherings of students heavily influenced by Marxist ideology, heavily influenced by the Marxism of mainstream culture, going out and stopping traffic and harassing their neighbors, calling them racist. We're seeing them do that in groups, sizable groups for some small towns. One small town here in southeast Minnesota barely cracks 3,000 people, had a group of 50 or more students from the local high school stopping traffic and yelling at people, vulgar things at people, while they were holding Black Lives Matter signs and disband the police signs and I can't breathe signs. The strange irony of this is most of those, and in there again, your ethnicity doesn't matter. If you have an agenda, then or a worldview or a mindset, then you're entitled to that. But oftentimes what we're seeing is it's this Marxist ideology that has been force-fed them in government schools. It's unavoidable. It's unavoidable. Philosophically speaking, it's unavoidable. So there again, how does this tie into COVID-19 responses? So these riots have continued. Portland has seen over 50 nights of rioting that went massively and continues to go massively unchecked. It's gone disregarded by Portland's ruling elite. Federal troops, and not troops actually, federal law enforcement officials have had to step in just to protect federal property and property around federal property. Many of them have been severely injured, and yet people are protesting them. So-called American patriots are protesting that federal law enforcement is intervening. I don't understand that. So all of these things are playing in together, and I've referenced the tactics of leftist progressive Marxism as it was forwarded by Saul Alinsky. who was a student of Antonio Gramsci. Antonio Gramsci was a Marxist proponent. He favored social Marxism over economic Marxism. But what the media isn't talking about in all of this is how there's this massive confluence, if you will, of these two troublesome periods coming together. And what that is all of these draconian, despotic measures were taken to shut down the economy, shut down people's livelihoods, and to protect us. Just mind you, to protect us. And then this George Floyd incident kicks off all of this rioting and all of this upheaval, this cultural battle, this cultural war that we're going through. And all of these Marxist leaders step back and allow the riots to happen, allow the protests to happen, and don't intervene at all. The media doesn't talk about this hypocrisy. But what they continue to talk about is COVID-19. We have to be wary and mindful of groups gathering together, and that's, if they're rallying against COVID-19 responses, COVID-19 measures, we have to make sure that these people aren't allowed to meet. Governor Walz of Minnesota, building up to May 25th, Memorial Day, insisted that he needed to see thousands and thousands of people tested. If we were going to get out on the other side of this COVID-19 hysteria in one piece and return to any semblance of normalcy, or normalcy, if you will. Until then, we had to embrace a new normal. So we have all of this stuff swirling around, this giant cultural worldview tornado that's just ripping across the landscape of the United States, and especially in the state of Minnesota and other places. And now our numbers are going up, and we're getting these mask mandates and these facial covering requirements. And all of this is going on, and it's we have to do these things. We have to have these mask mandates. We're going to have to start shutting down businesses again because numbers are going up. And what the media will not do is, as they're reporting the increase in these numbers, they won't be honest. They won't tell us the truth. Of course the numbers are going up. We're testing more people. We're absolutely going to see an uptick in numbers. We're getting more people to test. And I'm not even going to elaborate on this concept of, shall we say, fudged COVID numbers. There's so much evidence out there right now that we've got video after video of official admitting that they're labeling any death where someone may be showing signs of COVID as being a COVID death, whether it's a COVID death or not. Autopsies being refused to families when a loved one dies and they don't believe it was COVID-19. All of that's out there. You can find it. It's not conspiracy. It's reality. So the media is refusing to talk about, of course, the numbers of positive cases of COVID-19 are going to go up when we're testing more people. The other aspect that they're not talking about in all of this is that the number of deaths are declining on average as the number of positive tests go up. So we have this uptick in positive tests. Okay, we should have expected that as we tested more people. We should have been prepared for that. It's not that the number of people that are getting positive results on COVID is actually really changing. I would posit that the number is actually probably stagnant. It's probably been the same number of positives or percentage of positives that it's been since the beginning, as people continue to be infected, if you will. The percentages are actually shrinking when it comes to fatalities. And as everybody keeps talking about, this is a virus that has a 99% survival rate. 99% survival rate. And that, let's just give it a 90% survival rate. 90% of the people that are infected with COVID-19 survive. But here's the other scare now that the media is talking about. It has long-term side effects on your health. What doesn't? What doesn't have a long-term side effect on your health in many cases? Obesity? Obesity does. I was a fat man 2 years ago. Very fat. I've lost well over 70 pounds, okay? Let's just put it that way. I've lost well over 70 pounds in the last 2 years. It's not a lot for some people. Some people lose even more than that in less than a year. But I've lost well over 70 pounds in the last 2 years. I'm probably going to suffer the effects of being obese for quite a while. It happens. You get a cold, it has long-term effects. You get a stomach flu, it has long-term effects. Sometimes it's due to treatment. We know of people who have had antibiotics who now face lifelong gastrointestinal issues. So we know people that have had gastrointestinal issues due to antibiotics. And so there's always going to be a long-term, if you will, side effect to any kind of illness, whether you get treated for it and it's related to the treatment. Now, sometimes it doesn't happen with colds, which is a coronavirus, by the way, like COVID-19. So we're constantly getting lambasted if we talk about the reality of COVID-19 and its survivability, even if it's only 90%. I can't believe I'm saying only 90% survivability. But we're also getting lambasted, or excuse me, not lambasted, we're being like inundated with this information that, oh, you survived it, but now you may have these long-term recurring problems if you survive it. So there's this fear. And intermixed with all of that is the lack of talk about whether or not the leftist rioters, the thug Marxists that make up the Black Lives Matter movement and the Antifa movement that are doing all of this damage across the United States, that are continuing to riot, continuing to pull down statues, continuing to attempt to burn down courthouses and police precincts in their communities. We're not talking about whether or not this is contributing to the uptick as well. At all. Our little town here, city where I live, Spring Valley, Minnesota, we just had, in the last 14 days, we had a scare because somebody was positive and they had contact with several people. And boy, the talk around our town, I mean, our town is barely over 2,500. I think we might be at 26, 2,700 by now. Largest city in Fillmore County, by the way. Boy, our numbers were skyrocketing because of this one particular situation. And it's been 2 weeks now, just keep this in mind, over 2 weeks. People in Spring Valley are not dying. Our numbers aren't going up. And that's the thing. Yeah, we're going to get a lot of positives right now. Many of them are going to be false, but a good percentage of them might be legit. We're getting a lot of positives, which means the number of people dying is going to go down. And they have to keep us afraid, so they start talking about long-term side effects. We can't allow this to go on. The media, the legacy media, the mainstream media, Fox News, CNN, MSNBC, the CBS, NBC, ABC, none of them are talking about this. They're not going to talk to you about the reality. They're going to talk to you about the scare. And Fox News is bought in hook, line, and sinker. If you think you're a right-winger, if you think that you're a conservative and your source for unbiased news is Fox News, you're a dolt. You're an absolute dolt. You're a reactionary conservative. Whatever Fox News tells you, that's a conservative position, and you take it. If you're a Fox News person and that's where you get your news, you're a dolt. If you're a leftist Marxist and your news comes from CNN and that's where you get the majority of your news, you're adult. You have got to start going to alternative media sources, and you have to start getting your commentary, because they're all about commentary. They're all about op-ed pieces at those news agencies. You have to start going other places, because the media is not being honest with you. So think about this. Uptick is not indicative of a higher infection rate than we planned. Uptick in infections is actually a result of more testing and more accurate testing, and quite a bit of fudging of numbers by their own admission. All the talk about the uptick in numbers isn't addressing the downtick and the downward trend in fatalities. It's not addressing that. And it needs to. Our numbers of deaths are declining, dying, if you will. And now all of a sudden this emphasis on side effects down the road. It's all meant to keep you numb, to keep you afraid, to keep you reacting but not responding. You need to think for yourselves, people. Get your news from reliable sources, not from the mainstream media anymore, not from the legacy media. They're not interested in you, they're not interested in truth. They're interested in an agenda, and they're fomenting fear, and you're buying into it, and you have to stop. Stop being afraid. Resist the media, and resist tyranny. As always, thanks for watching the video. Thanks for being open-minded. Thanks for listening. I would ask that over here in the corner, somewhere on your screen, you hit the subscribe button. It's important, not for me, but because mainstream media, legacy media, isn't going to get the word out. They're not going to let people who don't toe the established line speak. So for the sake of liberty and for the sake of the defense of this nation, small little independent voices like mine need to be heard, especially the interviews. It's got very little to do with my commentary and a lot more to do with the interviews and the people who are affected when liberties are tread on. So once again, hit the subscribe button, like, subscribe, and share. Thank you very much.